everybody, Ty here. Hope everyone's doing well. Well, for a while, we've been saying that Dixie Alley was going to start to open up here, and well, we saw it a few days ago. Although it wasn't really a significant event, we had a few tornadoes occur here. I think this event, however, could have a slightly higher ceiling. There's a lot of potential in this event, but there are some things we're going to go over here that both help and potentially could hurt this event too, in regards to its severe weather production. Hope you guys are enjoying the content. Make sure you hit this hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Also, make sure you get that notification bell on. I've noticed only a handful of you are even subscribed to the channel here. About maybe 50% of you that watch as of late. See if we can't get more people to subscribe here. Definitely would help. In any case, though, as I've said before, we kind of knew the score with this one. And the thing is with this, like I said before, not really surprised to see the enhanced risk. We've been talking about this for the last week non-stop, but we've been actually looking at this weather pattern for almost the last 14 to 15 days, so really 2 weeks now. But this juncture now, since we're less than 2 days out here, we can actually get an in-depth look at our hazards here. The enhanced risk does include a 30% damaging wind area. This is stretching all the way from Memphis back towards Alexandria, Louisiana, maybe even as close as Shreveport, heading into Jackson, Mississippi, and even heading as far as Tuscaloosa, Alabama here, and areas even further off to the east. We also have the slight risk, which has actually been trimmed back a little bit. It was a little bit further off towards the east and included the Atlanta metro area, but you guys have since been put on the border now. But we do have to keep an eye out over towards Nashville, Chattanooga, Northwest Georgia, which would include the city of Rome, Jackson, Tennessee, and then even back towards the west, let's say towards Lufkin, Texas, Shreveport, New Orleans, and then Mobile, Dothan, Alabama as well. You guys are in that slight risk as well for damaging winds to go along with it. There is also a hail threat with this. It's going to be early in the day. This is going to mainly stay more off towards the west here, mainly over towards that Arkansas, Mississippi border, and also over towards the Louisiana, Mississippi line here, just north of the Delta at this juncture here. So anywhere from Shreveport to Memphis could be a point of interest where you would get a slightly higher hail threat here. But the big topic, of course, which I'm sure everyone wants to know about, is that tornado threat. We do have a enhanced risk here, so that's our 10% area with a hatched signal to go along with it, which includes the threat for some stronger to potentially even violent tornadoes. So in this environment here, as we got an update here, just as we were talking about that, from Memphis all the way back towards very similar areas, once again, I would say just to the east of Shreveport here. And this is going to actually end up staying north of Alexandria. This is going to be our corridor where we watch out for the threat of stronger tornadoes. There could be a little bit of an extension or growth to this area off to the east here. I do think that Jackson may have an opportunity at that as well, based off what I've seen off the latest models, which we'll be getting into in just a little bit here. But even so, we do have a very large 5% area to go along with this. It stretches almost through the entire state of Birmingham, through the entire state of Mississippi, most of Louisiana, which includes the city of New Orleans. Also Baton Rouge is in there as well. And then over towards Jackson, Tennessee, and Nashville, we also have a pretty large 5% area. So it gets pretty busy. And even in the 2% areas, we can't sleep on that either. We do have Florida Panhandle in there, Columbus, Georgia, Northwest Georgia in there as well, even stretching all the way into Kentucky now at this point. So this area has expanded. There's still not quite as much confidence in these areas, so we do have to keep an eye out. And we can't forget Little Rock either. But this is pretty much where we're going to be watching for our severe weather threat and, of course, our tornado threat as we go further along here. And then also, of course, as in case anyone might not know, we will be covering that live. But in any case, this is a look at what our jet stream is going to most likely be like during the event here. Not much has really changed with this signal. There are a couple of interesting trends, though, that I'm kind of picking up on and I'm thinking that are possible. Not a guarantee, however. But one thing that I'm watching very closely is the orientation of this trough right now. And what I mean by that is the tilt. And when I say tilt, when it's in this phase right here, and I'm going to pause it, this is what you will call a positive tilt, where the orientation of that tilt is a little bit more so off this way. It's kind of pointing in a direction like this. But watch what happens when we move this forward a bit here. So still positive right here. It seems like it tries to begin to go neutral here. This is the first time I've really seen in the model trends here where this has been taking a little bit of a shift towards the neutral direction here. The timing of this is going to be key here. As of right now, with the way this looks, I think the timing might be a little bit too late. But in any case, though, these tend to change on the fly here. So I'm interested to see just what ends up happening with this, because this could also change the timing in which the storms arrive and also change the intensity to go with it. Because a neutral tilt or negative tilt usually would mean an even more amped up trough, which it's already pretty amped up here. You can see we have a maximum over here with 112 knot winds, which is really strong. So that should kind of give you an idea of what we're dealing with here as far as the wind profile is concerned, especially towards the upper levels where we're looking really impressive. As we get towards the mid levels of the atmosphere, we can clearly see signs of short waves popping up here with our contour lines. Anywhere where you're seeing these little ripples are going to be the point of interest. You can see at least 2 of them right now. There could even be a third one that tries to creep up over here towards Kentucky, but mainly over towards Tennessee and parts of Mississippi, especially north central Mississippi, are going to be the point of interest here. And these are going to, of course, persist as we get later into the evening. And eventually, as we go through even the morning hours of Sunday, there's still a chance of severe weather, although the threat is mostly marginal at this point. Now, as we go towards that low-level jet, this is going to be a key factor to our tornadic activity here. In recent days, I've been a little bit skeptical of it because the turning of the winds with height have been subpar to moderately impressive, but this has picked up quite notably over the last 24 to 36 hours here. We have a classic case of the winds pushing almost north to south at times here. So with that going on, and let's say we were to go back to the 500 millibar here, you can see these wind barbs here are going off to the northeast, changing wind directions at different heights of the atmosphere, also speed shear being a factor as well, differing wind speeds at different levels of the atmosphere. I would say that the wind profile has uptrended a good bit here. So as we go further along here, I'm going to point out something to you that might be of interest in regards to this severe weather threat is where the frontal boundary is. So with the last setup, the one thing to make note of here is the fact that a lot of storms that ended up producing tornadoes, and this was on Wednesday, if I remember correctly. It wasn't the most memorable outbreak, but the ones that did end up producing tornadoes produced them mostly along the warm front boundary here. I don't necessarily think we'll have that situation there, but it's something I'm going to be keeping a close eye on. Our warm sector, and you'll actually be able to see that on this part of this, on the bottom left corner of the screen here. You can see how that warm front coincides perfectly with where I drew the so-called boundary here, is where that warm air is advecting. And then if I were to go back over here and we would try our best to draw this. I'm not great with these, by the way, so if the drawing looks sloppy, I apologize. If I can get this to even work. There we go. Somewhere back up in here, and it's kind of hard to see, but somewhere in here is where our cold front is. It could even be further back, if I'm being honest. It's somewhere either here or here. It's going to be where our cold front is. And that's going to be an important factor to the time frame in which that tornado threat's going to be greatest here. We're going to, of course, see this evolve as we continue to go on throughout the day. As we know, this isn't going to be just sitting still. So if we were to go ahead and move this up to where we can get into a loop here, what I want you to pay attention to is exactly where that low pressure ends up stacking up to go along with it, because this is what's also going to cause those low level winds to really ramp up at this point. You can see that the surface winds are going directly north to south at this point, so winds are going to be very strong at all levels of the atmosphere, also changing of the winds, turning of the winds with height. So, like I said, the wind profile of this system is pretty much A1 at this point. But nonetheless here, the limiting factor that I think will come in play with this system is going to be the fact that our forcing is going to be somewhat pretty weak, actually, I'd say. And with a cap not in place, there's going to be a lot of convection to go along with it, and especially with that moisture return that we're going to have that coincides with that. As a result, there's going to be a lot of competition between these storms, most likely. So that's why that warm front comes into play. If any storms can mature along that warm front, I do think that amplifies the tornado threat. But with so much convection, that could become a limiting factor. Not a guarantee, but something to pay attention to as we go through the day tomorrow. We'll be discussing that more, of course, as we go live. So, a couple other things we're going to look at before we get moving here. And we're going to go ahead and, of course, look at our instability here. We're mainly interested in our surface cape here, but we're also going to we're actually going to go a little further. We're going to take a look at our hodiographs as well. We're going to get up close and personal, too, since we know exactly what region we're going to be looking at in particular. And I'm going to go ahead and take that off the screen now. But as you can see, by the time we look into 19C, you can see that we have a good bit of instability available already at this juncture. Just wait for the screen to update here. There we go. So by the time we get towards 20Z, this is going to be towards the Mississippi Delta. It's going to be one of the first places we look here. And I want you to pay attention to this hodiograph loop here. The 0 to 3 kilometer range here. You can see a very upstanding loop here. So we have very strong wind shear clearly just by looking at this. Whenever you see these loops kind of go a little bit further into the vertical and then you see them kind of come down like that, that's usually a good sign. If this were to do this in all three levels of the atmosphere, then I would be very concerned about the threat of a strong tornado at this point. But we see just a tiny little bit of drop off, which is somewhat good news, although it's still a pretty well pronounced loop and sickle shape, so it does look like there's a chance that we could see supercells in this environment here. The instability towards this area, as we mentioned, is pretty solid here. We have a surface cape reading of nearly 2200 joules per kilogram, so that's well over double of what you would really need for severe weather. So with that being said, and also the dew points being as rich as they are, nearly 70-degree dew points, and also storm relative felicity being very high as well, over 200 meters squared per second squared, looks like the environment is relatively prime just in this region here. But that's not the only region that we're going to be looking at within this region, or I guess you could say it's a sub-region. But I'm especially interested in the Mississippi-Tennessee border here, just outside of Memphis. As you can see here, look, by the time we get into the evening hours here, look at how high this loop is right here. That is very impressive and very dangerous at that. So this environment right here, this is where you would kind of ring the alarm a little bit more so. Like I said, none of this is guaranteed, but given the sickle shape of this hodiograph and how large the loop is here, that is very strong low-level wind shear and a very strong signal for a tornado threat, and potentially a strong one at that. The storm relative felicities are off the charts here at 509 meters squared per second squared. There are a couple of limiting factors here. I do think the lift index is a little bit subpar, but still sufficient enough to produce nonetheless here. Lapse rates are not necessarily poor, but they're not particularly steep with this either, which could be another limiting factor. However, that shear profile alone and the amount of instability available should probably be enough to give an opportunity to produce a tornado. It really just depends on if these storms can mature a little bit. I think convection really might be one of the big limiting factors here potentially. Oops, that moved a little bit quicker than I wanted to. Of course, as we get later into the evening, instability kind of drops off a little bit, and with that, the tornado threat does look like it lowers itself quite exponentially at that point. But in any case, though, at least as we get into the overnight hours even, especially over towards Louisiana. We still have a little bit of excess energy left over. Although I don't expect this to be anything super impressive, there is a small chance that we might get a tornado or two over here. Last thing we'll go ahead and look at is the significant tornado parameter, and then also we'll take a look at the reflectivity to nail down that exact timing in which we'll get these storms to fire off here. So as we of course get into the early afternoon, here's where we get those spikes at, and then we get a nice little spike over here, as I mentioned before, right on the border here between Mississippi, Tennessee. This is again going to be just outside of Memphis here, and this is where my interest really kind of peaks at this point in regards to the tornado threat. Like I said, another very impressive looping heliograph. If it was a little bit more into the vertical, I'd even be more concerned here, but the shear reading at 50 from the 0 to 1 kilometer range is always a red flag. The instability here is still sufficient, but nothing that really just screams out to me, so to speak, here. A couple other limiting factors come into play here: lapse rates, etc., convection, of course. But anywhere along that main line could be a point of concern, especially with any prefrontal cells that form out ahead of it. Click this sounding real quick over here towards central Mississippi. This looks even better. The lift is potentially going to be a factor here. Lapse rates also could be subpar to go along with this, but with the shear and the instability and also the low level components in the atmosphere, still might be enough. But like I said, with this environment here, just looks like there are some limiting factors, but we might have the ingredients necessary to overcome that. So here is a final look at what the radar could look like. Might do some observations tomorrow. We'll see what happens with that. But as you can see, a lot of convection early in the day, and this could become a limiting factor. We do see a little bit of a breakdown here, so depending on how cloud cover performs here, this could potentially make or break the evening here. Like I said, I really think this corridor a little bit further towards north and northwest central Mississippi could be the point of interest, and then heading into Tennessee as we get later into the evening. Do see a couple of potential prefrontal cells here as we go later into the evening, as we watch this move off to the east here. Then of course, as we get into the overnight hours, the threat really starts to drop off. Still could be a strong line of thunderstorms as we go into the evening and into the overnight, but I do think the threat by this point will be significantly reduced. But in any case, that's all I got for you guys here. This ended up turning into a lengthier video than I was expecting, but there are a lot of intricacies with this system here that I just wanted to make sure I went over with you guys with. But in any case, I'm gonna see you guys tomorrow one way or another, and that's a fact. Until then, take care and have a good rest of your Friday here. Time Metal Weatherman signing off.